So at the end of Unit 3, Mrs. McCleary decides to assist her husband, Mr. McCleary, to find out more about Mrs. Meyer, especially her illegal activities which he suspects she is indulging into. So she dresses up as a young unmarried girl and takes off her wedding ring and even takes a false name, Miss Jones. So, in the beginning of Unit 4, she presents herself as Miss Jones to Mrs. McCleary. Mrs. Meyer, after the initial introductions, decides to tell her fortune through a pack of cards which she shuffles very energetically. She does tell Mrs. McClear that she reads cards to oblige friends and also as a part time. She divides the cards into five heaps, that is, groups, and then she cuts the first heap of cards and exclaims that the cards are diamonds, which she said means money, and the knave of hearts. She tells Miss Joan that it's a nice hand. So Mrs. McCleary, in the disguise of Miss Jones, wants to know more about the future, and she curiously asks Myers to disclose what else the cards have to say. Mrs. Meyer proceeds and says that the next heap, that is the second heap, contains the knave of diamonds and the ten of spades. She explains that the ten of spades means a journey. Then she exclaims that she also sees clubs, and clubs means worry, and a queen of hearts at the bottom also means that there is a love angle. Mrs. Meyer says that since there are diamonds again, it means that there's a lot of money in store for Miss Jones, that is Mrs. McClear. But she says that she cannot predict whether Mrs. McClear would go on a long journey or whether it's going to be somewhere near. But Mrs. McClear does admit that she had to go to Southampton to see an aunt. Mrs. Meyer quickly says that that must be the long journey, but she also says, when she cuts the fourth heap, that there is going to be somebody who is going to get in her way, and that somebody is an elderly man. Mrs. McCleary says that this elderly man must be her uncle. Mrs. Meyer cuts the fifth heap of cards and says that this is the nicest card that she has ever seen. And the reason that she gives for this is that there's going to be a wedding before the year is out. She further discloses and says that a very, very rich young man would marry Miss Jones. He would be a millionaire or a businessman, and that he would travel a lot. She also predicts her future and says that before Miss Jones is united or married, she would have to overcome great obstacles. And what's the obstacle? She says that there's going to be an elderly gentleman who is going to get in her way. But she warns Miss Jones, that is Mrs. McLear, and says that you will have to keep your nerve, your courage, and persevere. And she says that when Mrs. McLear does get married, she would have to go somewhere very far off, most likely across the ocean. That is, she would be married to someone who is going to be very rich and who would live very far away from where she was living presently. After disclosing this, she asks Mrs. McLear a guinea as her fees and also says at the same time that this fees would go for the Christian mission, would go to the Christian mission for the poor Negroes. Mrs. McLeary takes out £1 and 1 shilling and gives it to Mrs. Meyer and says, what would it cost her without any of those worries that she just mentioned? That is there any way that, or a solution that she could get married without all those obstacles? She would be willing to pay the fees if those obstacles could be lessened. Mrs. Meyer tells her that the cards cannot be bribed. Mrs. McLear thanks the lady and before leaving, Mrs. Meyer asks Mrs. McLear what her uncle did as a job, and Mrs. McLear said that he was in the police secret service. Mrs. McLear was quite confident of her disguise, and Mrs. Myers immediately drew 3 cards out of the heap and says, looking at those cards, that it's very nasty, very nasty. She repeatedly says that. And nastier means something very unpleasant or terrible. And then she tells Mrs. McLear that she must tell her uncle to meet her because she says he's threatened by a great danger. She insists that he must come and see her to find out more about this danger. And she also drops a hint that there are many from the police department who come and meet her and tell her about all their worries and the troubles that they face in their life. And she has solved a lot of their problems. She again tells Mrs. McLear to send her uncle to her for advice. And before she takes leave of Mrs. McLear, she says that tell him that she would be expecting him. So here ends the fourth unit of the story, The Fortune Teller.